Hello, my name is Joel McLeod, and welcome to the 905er. When we last had our guest on, it was prior to the provincial election. Back then, it was in response to a letter he had co-signed by other mayors in Ontario requesting Premier Doug Ford invoke the notwithstanding clause to give municipalities the power to remove encampments in their communities. That didn't happen specifically in the end. However, it did raise the issue of homelessness on our streets, specifically encampments. It shouldn't surprise anyone that the solution to homelessness is to build more homes, specifically affordable homes geared towards low-income or unhoused people. In that light, the actions taken in Niagara Region caught our eye. Last month, Niagara Region voted to bring in a new housing initiative that would see a sizable increase in funding to build specifically low-income and affordable housing. To discuss this housing strategy, I have invited back to the podcast St. Catharines Mayor Mat Siscoe to discuss the regional plan. As well, I discussed with him the city's recently passed bylaw, giving them the powers to remove homeless encampments from public spaces, as we had discussed in our initial episode. How do these two strategies work together? Will this make St. Catharines a more livable and safer community? And will this indeed help the most vulnerable? I asked these questions to Mayor Siscoe. Have a listen.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold, soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
Okay, well, thank you to Mayor Mat Siscoe from St. Catharines for joining us once again. This time to talk about, well, housing in the 905. Thank you, Mayor Siscoe, for coming on today.
Yeah, happy to be here. Happy to chat housing and all the things related to it.
I wanted to start off with zooming out a bit from St. Catharines to Niagara Region. Recently, last month, Niagara passed basically a funding motion for housing in St. Catharines, Niagara Falls, etc. I wonder if you could just summarize that for our listeners, as some of them are not in the Niagara region. Just kind of give a broad strokes of what that plan is to address this issue going forward.
For sure. So one of my roles, I'm the chair of the Niagara Regional Housing Board, and we're responsible for all of the subsidized rent geared to income units that we have across Niagara. And last month we passed through Niagara Regional Housing and then through Niagara Region Council, what we call our Consolidated Housing Master Plan. So basically, this is the blueprint for the next 30-ish years, if memory serves correct. 25 years, I guess. But basically, it's a plan to double the number of units that we have across Niagara. We've had master plans in the past. I'll be completely honest. The master plans of the past, I think, were unrealistic. They saw us building large numbers of units in individual years, big tranches of units, which just wasn't reasonable. This one, I think, breaks it down on an annual basis and has a much more reasonable guideline, and it comes with budgetary implications, which I think are much more reasonable as well. Really, on an annual basis, to be able to pay for all of this housing that we want to build, it worked out to between a 0.1 and 0.2% increase on an annual basis, to build up the money that we need. So I think it's a much more realistic plan. I think it recognizes the needs that we have here. We have 11,000, might be closer to 12,000 people on a wait list now, trying to get into regional housing. We recognize there's a need, but we also recognize that there are other things that can be done to also reduce the pressure on that wait list. So the Consolidated Housing Master Plan is a big part of what we're trying to accomplish, but it's not the only thing. It's a major piece of the puzzle, but there are other pieces we also need to see fall into play to get people off the wait list.
Part of the plan, as I understand it, is you're requesting a moderate increase in taxation to cover the deficit that you're projecting will be in the budget for this project going forward. Not detrimental to anyone living in the Niagara region, but just enough to cover the cost of what this is needed.
if I recall correctly from the standard, there was an initial plan where it was basically all paid for by the province and the federal funds, or you guys go all in, and this was kind of a happy medium. I wonder if you could just comment a bit about that and how this will impact the taxpayer in St. Catharines and Niagara Region.
Yeah. So, and that sort of speaks to the, I don't want to call it pie in the sky, but like it was an unrealistic plan. The hope that, the feds and the province would come forward and they'd be able to pay for all of this. That's not ultimately very realistic. So the plan that we've moved forward with and that has been endorsed is, 25% of the funding coming from the region through property tax increases. So that's at 0.1 to 0.2%. And really, it depends on how big the overall tax increase is on an annual basis. If it's a bigger tax increase, then the portion that's responsible, that housing is responsible for, is much smaller. So between 0.1 and 0.2%. And then there are other savings that we will have. We have a number of buildings in the region that are currently coming to the end of mortgage, and buildings that have been built previously. So we're able to take the savings from that to apply towards this as well. So that sort of, I always say it's important when you're going to upper levels of government, you've got to demonstrate that you have some skin in the game, right? This has been my experience with provincial and federal funding programs. They want to make sure that the local area municipality or the region is putting forward money as well. So it's not just an investment from upper levels. This is us saying, listen, we're committed to this and we have a viable funding mechanism on our end to be able to accomplish it. So there won't be a situation where the province and the feds come forward and say, listen, we can give you funding for this. And, oh, well, we don't have the money for that. Could you front the other 25%? Like, we're there at the table. And I think that's why this plan is viable. And we've gotten good feedback from upper levels of government as well. Like I said, they want to know that you're going to be standing with them as a funding partner, not just with your handout. And I think for too long, municipalities have taken that view. Like, what can the upper levels do for us? Well, you have to do something for yourself as well. So this is us taking responsibility for the problem, but also saying, listen, we can't do this without you. There's a happy medium there.
So does this plan rely on provincial or federal funds to make it happen? Or is this something that the region could carry forward kind of on your own shoulders over the next 30 years?
We could do some of it, but we can't do the whole plan by ourselves. Okay. And I think this is one of those areas that I've tried to get across to my colleagues at upper levels of government, but also to the broader community. Municipalities, city and region combined, are only 8 or 9% of the overall taxes that you pay. Right? For every dollar you pay in taxes, only about 8 or 9 cents goes to the city and the region combined. But we're responsible for, depending on who's doing the measuring, between 60 and 70% of the infrastructure, and social housing falls into that. We're the only province, I believe, that still has social housing, as a city or a regional responsibility. In other provinces, this is a provincial responsibility. So the costs sit at our level. We need help on the capital. Like, that's just the simple reality. And I don't think anybody's made any bones about that. I was at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities conference, a lot of talk about this, especially, from Ontario municipalities saying we need the help. At the Association of Municipalities of Ontario conference last year, and probably again this year, we're going to have the same conversation. We need help. Social housing is not something that can be built just by the local government. It just can't. The costs have increased a lot over the years, but we also only have one way to bring in any revenue, and that's property tax. And I'm sure you've heard many people say it, but property tax is the worst form of taxation. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't take into account somebody's ability to pay. It's based off of, the biggest asset they bought, probably at the highest earning potential of their entire lives. And as they got older, their earning potential goes down once they retire. It's an immediate 30% haircut. But property tax, we're not allowed to take that into account. We still have to continue to charge property tax. You can't fund social housing based off of that revenue source because it's the most regressive form of tax we have. So we do need help. And, that the benefit of a plan like this, and this is what I always say at the region, is when I go and advocate to upper levels of government, I speak to ministers provincially or federally, I now have a plan that I can say, no, we know how we're going to do this. We know how we're going to fund our portion. We're asking you to show us how to fund the rest of it.
And just for clarity's sake, when we're talking about funding, the region itself will build these houses. Like, the region will be the owner of these units. You will rent them out on a per income basis or as needed. This isn't like a private enterprise coming in to build. built?
No, this is Niagara Regional Housing. So this is through the region. And yeah, a lot of these units, the vast majority of them are rent geared to income. So what we're doing in those situations is we're, identifying individuals who have a need. They can't pay market rent. And so 30% of their income is what they get charged in terms of rent. And that's one of the ways that we keep people sheltered, right? So we know there's a need for it. And, that's why we went forward with the plan.
The one thing about this model that always strikes me interesting is that over time, it's very easy for a regional housing company, a corporation such as this, to easily become the biggest landlord in a region. I mean, over time, you're not going to give up these houses. There's no plan to sell these off. It's just keep it in the inventory and rent it out. Are you planning on this, like in 30 years time, feasibly being the largest landlord in Niagara Region?
I don't think that's an ideal situation, but I think it's the reality. When it comes to the cost of rents, there's a second piece to this, which I'll get into in a second, but we have a housing crisis right now across the country. Niagara Region is no different, and the affordability of housing is a real difficult point. One of the things that we've identified, and I don't know if this is unique to Niagara or if it's the same case in other places, we have a lot of people now who are paying what would be the market rent in our Niagara regional housing units. That's problematic, but the reason why that situation exists is because we don't have any market rentals either. In St. Catharines, there were a couple of years where we were operating at essentially a 0% vacancy rate. So there was nowhere for people to go. One of our pushes through the city is we're trying to incentivize purpose-built rentals. Like that is very much our driving focus right now, is getting more purpose-built rentals built in the community. We're trying to incentivize that kind of development because we recognize, and I say this at almost every NRH board meeting, every time we're able to move a family out of NRH housing into market-based housing because they can afford it, that's almost like building a brand new unit. Like that unit is now available to take someone off of the wait list. So that's the second piece to this. It's really trying to get all of our municipalities, because the building of market units that falls to the local area municipality. Getting everybody sort of moving in the same direction. Yeah, we've got to incentivize these purpose-built rentals, and helpfully, like the GST is now being waived on purpose-built rentals. The CMHC, that's the direction they're going. They're putting in caveats about needing to have affordability clauses, for X percent of the units, which I think is important. We're really trying to get that side of it going as well, because ultimately we can't build our way out of the wait list. Like I said, we're looking to double the number of units that we have. So we go from 3,000 to 6,000. But right now, I believe the number is 11 or 12,000 folks on the wait list. So those new units, unfortunately, they're not going to be able to take up all of that. But if we can get some of the folks who can afford to move into market housing, then now we're making some headway.
Maybe zoom out a little bit further. I'm wondering, how do you picture this fitting into the larger scheme of getting people housed permanently and safely? Because I think the general consensus is social housing is meant as a safety net, catch you, you're somewhere safe, you can build up equity or build up get your life together a bit, and then move into buying a property or into market rent. Is that the plan here in terms of the housing structure, or is this something maybe a little bit more, thinking of something like in the UK where they have council housing where you move in and you live there pretty much for the rest of your life? Is that what we're talking about here? Or are we talking, how does this work?
I think it's a combination of both, truthfully. There are some folks who, they will never be able to afford to leave a rent geared to income unit, for one reason or another. Maybe they're dependent on ODSP or Ontario Works, some sort of social assistance, and they're just not going to be able to afford to get into a market housing. We recognize that, and that's part of what this is. But to your point, the other part of it is for people to, try and get back on their feet, to have safe shelter. Well, maybe they're re-educating, maybe they're getting, services that they require to be able to, at some point, integrate into a full-time job that will allow them to move out. It's got to meet both of those needs. One of our big pushes at Niagara Region is to get more transition and supportive housing. Now, that doesn't fall under the NRH banner. That's something different. But getting more of that, and the folks who maybe would be able to fit into the transition and supportive housing, if they don't need permanent supportive housing, then maybe their next step is the NRH units and into rent geared to income units. there's a hope that, there's progression for people, because ultimately, you want people to get back on their feet. You want them to be able to take care of their own needs, without need for government support. You recognize sometimes that's not going to be possible. In those cases, the social support system is supposed to be there to support them. But if they can, that's a goal that we have for anybody who's able to achieve it.
What's been the response from the province and the feds on this? Are you expecting like a contribution from them sometime soon to match this, or
I think it's going to come on a case by case basis. As I said, this model has projects sort of phased out year by year by year. As of right now, we're applying for funding year by year by year on each of these projects, trying to find matching dollars or contributions through the different funding envelopes, which appear, disappear, stick around for some time. That's ultimately the goal from our perspective. It's going to take a lot of work, but this plan actually identifies those projects. Right now, I want to say, and I'm going off of memory here, so I may be off, but I think we have 5 projects that are basically shovel ready at this point, and it's just a matter of identifying the funding that's going to be available to be able to fund it, get the financing in place, and then we can move forward. We have the properties. We've moved through a lot of the hurdles, or not the hurdles, but the normal planning processes, because at the end of the day, all of these need to go through the same planning and building, processes that every other development has to go through. We've got to that phase where once we can get the financing in place, and it's a matter of, just going through the process for each one of these. In a perfect world, I would hope that some form of funding envelope is created at either the provincial or the federal or both levels that we're able to access for this specific type of housing, because I know we're not the only ones going through this. Every other mayor that I talk to that's, either single tier or 2-tier, we're all having the same issues about getting this type of housing built. So, the advocacy work that's happening at the provincial and federal level is centered around that, trying to come to some sort of place where we don't have to pit project against project. But right now we do. And that's why, as I said, I want to make sure that we have something we can justify and say, no, we've got money in this as well. We're not just begging for a handout. We're saying, hey, partner with us, because partnerships are where we're actually going to be able to get these built.
When we last had you on, it was because you were signatory to a letter requesting the notwithstanding clause to be used by Premier Doug Ford. Recently, you've come under fire because St. Catharines has passed bylaw to use some of your money to remove encampments in the streets of St. Catharines. I'm wondering if you could just tell me how that plan fits into this plan of building housing, that if you're going to build affordable or supportive housing for individuals and you're removing encampments, how do you square these two policies?
Well, there's 2 pieces to this, and so first I will clarify. The bylaw that we passed is a public space use bylaw. It's been presented by some in the community as an anti-encampment bylaw. It's actually not. It identifies the places where we've said, listen, this is a sensitive use. You can't have an encampment, and the bylaw says within 100 meters of a school, within 50 meters of a playground, within 30 meters of a residential property line. There are still lots of areas across the city where encampments, as much as nobody loves encampments, and I don't think they're particularly safe, I also accept, if people have nowhere else to live, they have to live somewhere where encampments can go. And a couple of people have tried to say, oh, you're trying to hide it. I'm not trying to hide encampments. Frankly, I think the region needs to step up and recognize that these encampments exist, and it's the regional responsibility, with help from the province, but regional responsibility to provide shelter. I should also say, the transition and supportive housing doesn't fall under the Niagara Regional Housing, right? It's fully within, that's under public health and social services at the region, and they need to be providing the transition and supportive housing. I'm pushing hard at the regional level to say, hey, you have to build more transition and supportive housing. The worst thing in the world is building shelters. Like, as much as shelters are a stopgap, they're just that. If you don't have transition and supportive housing, you're setting folks up for failure if you think you can put them in a shelter and then just put them in a market rental or an NRH apartment and good luck. That doesn't work. One of the things that the city did was we gave the region about $5.5 million worth of land to build just that type of housing. We call it bridge housing. It's a successful program which has worked in Niagara Falls. When I saw what they were doing there, it's 24 hours. You have people on site providing support. In the Falls, it's 25 units. What is being built in St. Catharines now will be 48 units. But it's exactly the type of housing that gets people, out of encampments and prepares them to enter into, real apartments, find real solutions. And this is what we always talk about. We want to find real solutions, but
is this similar to like the Tiny Hats initiative that was in Hamilton or in Kitchener? Or
no. So bridge housing, in this case, it's going to be a 48 apartment building, basically.
Okay, I see.
We've got one floor. So I think 12 of the 48 units are going to be for people that are chronic homeless, but also regular visitors to the ER. So they have health issues, and it's tied into the Ministry of Health. So we're going to have, staff there that are able to deal with their health issues in an effort to try and keep them, we don't want them in the emergency room on a regular basis. We're also going to be using some of the units will eventually be tied into the Heart Hub that we have funding for, the Homeless Addiction Rehabilitation Treatment Hub. But that's the answer. And I said to the region, when I saw the bridge housing the first time, I said, I want 3 of these. I want 3 of these buildings in the city of St. Catharines. The bylaw is trying to deal with the real, safety concerns that people have in the community, and the fact that we have had encampments, built right up against people's backyards, or, underneath a playground structure or next to an elementary school. It's a safety issue. And, when I ask people, because there's been some pushback, but when I say to people, okay, well, how close do you think an encampment should be to an elementary school? I haven't had a single person say it should be closer than 100 meters. Nobody actually disagrees with, having some setback requirements. There are going to be places in the city where encampments are able to be set up. I've also said, though, I'm never going to say encampments are okay, because I don't want the region to turn around and say encampments are okay, because that lets them off the hook to build the transition and the supportive housing that has to be built for these folks. At the end of the day, homeless encampments are not, by and large, are not safe places. We know there are a lot of things that can go on. Some of them are safer than others. I'm fully willing to admit that. But we're just watching the wrap up of a trial in Niagara Falls where a woman in a homeless encampment was murdered by someone else in the homeless encampment and then buried in a shallow grave. I can't allow that to be normalized in my community. We want people to be in supportive and transition housing. Some of them will need full-time permanent supportive housing. I need the region to build that as well, because frankly, we don't have that inventory either. And my staff and I have been trying to work with groups like Indwell to get down into Niagara, because the work they do is amazing and it's necessary. And we don't have that here, And so I've been trying to, get some of the advocates who want to yell at me about the bylaw that we've introduced, help me at the region, because we need this stuff to be built. And if the political pressure is all on the city saying, well, you shouldn't be trying to, enforce this bylaw, but that's my mandate. That's literally the mandate of the city when it comes to public spaces, parks, and, public areas like that. We're supposed to try and keep it safe and try and keep it clean and try and keep it available to people in the community. I need the region to fulfill their mandate. And I want to make sure that I'm differentiating, because when it comes to the Consolidated Housing Master Plan, that is one part of the mandate. And I think the region is fulfilling its mandate on that side. And ultimately, some of the folks who are in homeless encampments now, if we had transition and supportive housing, like the bridge housing that we're getting built here in St. Catharines, we could transition them through there into the NRH housing. And that's a good news story. But there's a missing piece. And that's what I've been fighting with the region now for 2.5 years on, is you have to build this missing piece. I don't want shelters. I want housing. I accept that shelters need to exist as well. And so we will try to work with the region to have, these shelters, the shelter spaces that are necessary. But ultimately, let's stop frittering around with the Band-Aid and start identifying the actual fixes to the problems.
I hear what you're saying. I've heard criticism from your opponents saying that this bylaw would criminalize homelessness, that there are people who would bring meals to the encampments to feed homelessness or to provide, spare clothing drives, etc. That would be deemed illegal because this bylaw would criminalize it, and assistance to homeless people would be outlawed in St. Catharines. I'm going to ask you: is that
no?
If somebody wanted to, if a church or a restaurant had excess food that they said, you know what, I'm going to go give it to somebody I see on the street or a group of people I see on the street. Like St. Catharines police is not going to stop them and say, here's a ticket or I'm taking you downtown.
Our bylaw enforcement officials will not be doing anything like that. Our bylaw enforcement officials quite literally are going to make sure, listen, you can't be built up against the back fence line of the elementary school. You can't be in this park next to the playground. And if in those areas where encampments are not prohibited, and like I said, there are large areas in the city where that's the case, they're going to be there to make sure that things are being maintained safely. We're also adding staff to try and deal with some of the cleanup issues. Something that we've heard, right? Like it is hard to keep these areas clean. If we can provide assistance in that, well, then we're going to, because ultimately, if there are encampments in a large park, centralized in the city, we want it to still be clean, and we still want people to have a perception and a feeling of safety in that area. Not just, people outside of the encampment, people inside the encampment as well. And so we're adding staff to be able to deal with the garbage issues that come up around encampments and everything else. I think that there are folks who think the second you try to do anything in this sphere, it's a negative. And I've been dealing honestly with the rhetoric that's been thrown at us for the last month or so. And I struggle, I really do struggle when I look at it to understand where it's coming from, because if you read the bylaw and you listen to the conversations that are being had at city council, you listen to our legal staff, you listen to the bylaw folks, you listen to the counselors. And I mean, it's been an 11-2 vote, I think, both times with respect to this bylaw. This is a necessary step. But we're trying to work with the region because ultimately I want the region to be building the services that we need. This is why, like I said, we gave the region $5.5 million worth of property. We could have sold that on the open market, but we identified a need for bridge housing, and we identified a way to get it built faster than just waiting for the region to find a property and go through the steps. We transferred it. Well, shovels are in the ground now. They're building it on 320 Geneva. That's a step that we took. That it's outside. That one is outside of our mandate, but we recognize there's a need, and we're trying to be good partners within what our capacity is. Yeah.
This will be my last question for you, Mayor Siscoe. What's from the status quo as we are right now to start seeing this change? Do you have a timeline that you want to start seeing change happen in the region to get things like this bridge housing built, that these housing units started and getting people into them? Because I find that that's the one problem is that we talk about all these plans, and these plans are all great and wonderful, but nobody puts a timeline saying, within 365 days, we're going to have, 1,000 people housed. Just my words, not yours. So I'm wondering, what's your, do you have a timeline that you want to set or what's your benchmark for success on this, so that we know that the plan is going to be used?
With the housing master plan and the doubling of the NRH units, it's a 25-year plan, and my expectation is that we're going to start on time this year and next year with the units that are indicated. So, I mean, and we have units coming online this year as a part of the plan. So we're on track for that. With respect to the supportive and the transition housing, I mean, we didn't even have a plan for what we wanted to do previously. Staff are now making it because I demanded it in the fall. Like, we have to have a transition and supportive housing plan, because I can't advocate if I can't tell upper levels of government what we're trying to accomplish. They're doing that right now. As far as I'm concerned, my timeline is yesterday. We don't have any time to waste here. Every day that we don't have that supportive housing, that we aren't, taking unused hotel rooms and transitioning them into something like this, or old school buildings, or whatever buildings we can find to retrofit, every day we're not doing it is another day that the region is just accepting that there will be homeless encampments. Well, it's 2025, and Canada is one of the richest countries in the world. We can't accept that homeless encampments are just the norm. So my timeline was yesterday, but realistically, between now and the end of this term of council, we will have our bridge housing project online, and my expectation is plans for another one. That is my expectation, is that staff will have identified land and started the process to build another bridge housing facility. If not in St. Catharines, then somewhere in the Niagara region. I accept it's a regional system. I accept that I have to share, but we have to have plans for the next one, because the bridge housing, that supportive piece, as far as I'm concerned, and a lot of people who I've talked to have said, this is the actual way to solve the homelessness crisis. This is how you do it. So if we know that this is how you do it, then let's do it.
Well, I'll leave it at that for this episode. So thank you very much, Mayor Siscoe from St. Catharines. best of luck to you and Niagara Region for tackling this national problem in your own backyard. Thank you very much for taking the time to come on and explain it to us, and all the best to you.
I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.
That's it for this episode of the 905er. Thank you for listening. As always, you can send us your feedback, thoughts, and concerns or ideas for future episodes to our email, info@905er.ca. We'd love to hear from you. You can help us keep the 905er going by financially supporting us through Patreon as well as PayPal. Visit us at 905er.ca and click on the support tab. As well, links are in the show notes for your convenience. Lastly, you can find us on social media. Search for _905er on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn.
I'm Jeff Woods, and I'm shining a light on music and the rock stars who make it.
He just was one of those people, he stood out.
He was a magic guy. He really was a magic guy. We all have faults. He had the same amount of faults as we all had.
This is before Led Zeppelin. Robert was full on. I mean, he was Led Zeppelin without the band behind him. He had the hair, the jeans, the whole thing, you know, and he was amazing.
The Records and Rockstars podcast, heard around the world and yours to hear wherever you get podcasts. All the episodes from jeffwoodsradio.com.
I'm Andrea Askowitz.
And I'm Allison Langer. And we are the hosts of Writing Class Radio, a podcast, but we are so much more. We have writing classes. So if you are looking for live online classes where you can join a community, write to a prompt, get feedback, and get better, check out all our classes at writingclassradio.com.
And listen to our podcast wherever you get your podcasts and at writingclassradio.com.
So long for now. See you next time.